Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to hand over to John. John's going to kick us off tonight. So
just like that. Okay, thanks, Emil. So just to kick things off straight away, I'm just going to go straight into it. I came off the helm. Kenny came back, took the helm. I clipped on and went forward. Not sure what the hell I clipped onto because it wasn't solid. The boat lurched on a wave. I went straight over the side. Gone, straight out over the side of the boat. And it was just, I'd say about maybe 15, 20 seconds from start to end. And that was it. And that's literally how fast it went. So one of the things we're trying to get across here tonight is 1 minute you're standing there and you're doing absolutely great on solid ground. And when it actually kicks in, it goes just from 0 to 0 in split seconds. Okay. Do you want to kick off on what we're going to go through tonight?
yeah, so one of the key things that John and I discussed, and Michael and the crew as a whole, straight after pretty much the incident during the race, was that there's an awful lot of lessons that were learned from the incident, and that we feel it was our place to relay the lessons we've learned. We had an incredibly experienced crew, which John is going to go through, but it did happen ridiculously quickly. We had a very successful recovery, which was brilliant. But the key things that we're going to talk about tonight is why it was successful. And that's down to the crew, first and foremost. And it was also down to the alertness of the Coast Guard, the Round Ireland Race team, and of course our other competitors. So we won't really have time tonight to thank absolutely everybody, but tonight is all about why it was such a successful recovery. And hopefully we can pass on some lessons that we learned that everybody in the room can apply to their own boats. And one thing just to be clear about, this isn't just for offshore racing. We've seen a lot of man overboard incidents of recent involved in inshore races around the Cans, as well as in the particular Misery, which John just hasn't mentioned, that actually when he did go over it was 35 knots in the middle of the night. I'll hand you back over to John on that note.
Yeah. We'll work through the event just to give you an idea of exactly how we were piecing together the event. And when we get back towards the end, as we hook up the beginning of the West Coast, we'll get back onto the details of what happened. But just to give you an impression of, we thought it was important for people to know this isn't just a group of people that we just lashed together on a boat. Several people hadn't sailed with each other before, which is fair enough. But the experience on board was just an incredible gang of people to sail with. I'd sailed with a lot of them before. I had wanted to get a boat crew together. Kenny wanted to do the race. Kenny knew of other people, Michael Boyd in particular, who wanted to get a crew together as well. So in the end, we actually just combined resources, and I pulled together a couple of guys. The guys pulled together a couple of guys, and Michael brought in Dermot, who'd sailed with it before. I'd like to introduce a couple of the guys around the room. If you don't mind sticking your hand up or standing up and just saying hi. Phil, we sailed many times before. Do you want to give a 2-minute bio?
Stand up there, Phil.
Stand up. Okay. I guess for a time point of view, when we tried to put together a little promo pack for people before the race, I was trying to get an impression of how much experience we had on board. So the figure that you'll see on the thing here was, I think, when I had only 5 people on the list who were definitely confirmed as going, and we already had 80,000 offshore racing miles, not just cruising or anything, but 80,000 offshore racing miles combined between 5 of us. So the rest of the 4 people who came on the next couple of weeks after that, just built up even more than that. But it was a phenomenally experienced crew from day one. So there was Phil, Gunner was me, James Gunn, Lurkin Tig, who'd sailed a lot with Kenny and the guys many times before. Kylie had sailed many times as well. They'd just come back from the fast end on the previous year on the same boat. And myself and Gunnar and Phil have sailed on many boats many times before. Myself and Gunnar have done several Commodore's Cup campaigns, and I know Phil has got ridiculous amount of offshore miles. Can't even start to talk about that. So the experience was huge on board. Michael Boyd, as an addition with Dermot, was a huge plus as well. He's just massive offshore miles, massive experience of all kinds of yachting. So that was our crew. do you want to talk through the boat? We settled on a boat just because he happened to have one in his yard.
Just kind of sitting there. So this shot's actually of Jedi in the start of the 2017 Fastnet, where once again we had a good crew, and the boat did very well in that race. It won its class, and it hammered all the other J109s by a long margin. But John and I did sit down and we did talk about the race, the Round Ireland, kind of in the October, November time of 17, and we talked about what needed to be done to the boat. And you might think, well, what needs to be done to a boat that's just won its class and in everything in the Fastnet? And there was, if anybody knows me, I'm quite fastidious with the boats. So John and I sat down and we said about everything that needed to be done. We came up with a figure. Was quite tall, and then pretty much at the same token, Michael Boyd also approached me about the boat and what the boat needed to win to win the Round Ireland 2018. So we put together the boat pretty much. Once everything was agreed, the boat pretty much went into refit mode. So it was hauled out back into its dry sailed spot in the Irish, and boat was stripped back to nothing again, and every nut and bolt was replaced. And we had great input as a team this year because we got the team together early. So we were all down there in our duds, and we were wet sanding the bottom of the boat and looking like spotted Dalmatians. Gunnar was fixing hardware up on deck of the boat on the weekends, and we basically decided what extra bits we needed. So boat was hauled out, and we didn't focus not only on the so obviously the race winning side of the boat and everything that goes along with making the boat 110% and that it can win races, but there was also the safety side of the boat as well, was reviewed and checked and double checked and triple checked. And you'll see as we talk on later in the evening about actually how we had safety equipment that is beyond the regs on board, because a lot of boats just kind of tee up just to the racing regs and don't really go any further than that, whereas we actually carried equipment, albeit from previous lessons learned on the same boat, as to extra safety equipment that we carry above the regs, which was a big one. So a crew was formed, boat was sourced, boat was put together, and we thought we were there. If we're totally honest, we went out and did an Isora race, got hammered.
We thought we were legends.
Got absolutely hammered. So we actually had to rethink the sail program after that as well. So I suppose just I'm going to let the prep. Just this is John's. I'm going to let John jump in here, but this is John's kit before the race. Of particular prevalence is probably the object at the top of the screen. There.
Glad that one made the cut. So yeah, it was part of this prep was that we just went through everything. And I know a lot of people here are very experienced sailors anyway, so a lot of you will know this, but it wasn't just the boat hull that we knew was great and the crew that was great, but we paid attention to everything, got the provisions were right, the whole team got involved in sorting provisions for the boat, making sure we had good grub, and we did put effort into trying to keep the crew weight down as much as we could. And this is just one of the select shot of many of the entire morning up to the race of, this is how much I did. What have you got? What have you got? I put less in. So that went on for a while. So we had minimum on board. And I think the next shot probably shows what the final, so my wet gear, the life jacket and spares and everything else I was wearing. So we literally brought nothing except the kit we needed to race with and a few spares, a few bit of warm clothes, and that was it. And it's kind of just the level we went to. But yeah, it had us in good shape for the race. The boat, as you can see, was in fantastic shape. This is actually when it came out afterwards, but the boat was in fantastic shape, and we'd all put the effort into it. Kenny put tons of work in during the year. So yeah, we arrived at the start with pretty high spirits, pretty relaxed on the morning of the race. It was a beautiful day, a little bit of breeze coming from the north, so we were all set up for a downwind start, and yeah, we did a couple of relaxed, maybe hour out just shooting the breeze, having a laugh, setting the boat up. Had the usual crazy, not only talked to everybody down here about Round Ireland starts, you've seen it many times, but had the usual melee on the start line. By the way, pretty much any close-up photograph of me is always going to be of eating, and anybody who knows me knows why. I'll be about 2 hours getting through that sandwich. This is the start line. Pretty average start line for Round Ireland. All pretty hectic. We stayed out of it, way down on the inshore end of the line. And for the next couple of shots, you can see we got a very nice, clean getaway from the line up on the A3. So we're able to cruise around, get around the headland, and as soon as we can. Yeah, we were pretty well set up there. As soon as we got around the headland, they were able to burst off to the, you'll see the darker A2, and it just set us up for a very, very nice cruisy downwind, all the way down to Carnsore. So as soon as we were settled with the A2, shot up the staysail, and we were just on fire. Blazing down, good wind, good position. We kept an inshore kind of line. A lot of people went out, and you can see this is well down the coast. Can't remember where this was we crossed, but this is one of the class 40s, so we knew we were in pretty good water if we were in the same patch of water as class 40. So yeah, it was pretty much glorious. Very, very high spirits. Everyone having a bit of a laugh all the way down to Carnsore. I think there's a couple of shots then it was getting around Carnsore Point, and we went into a beautiful evening. You can see the sunset there. Kylie on the helm did a great job, and it was idyllic. The whole thing was absolutely idyllic. Got through the night, a bit of a tough night. And the next morning the breeze was changing a little bit. It was definitely increasing. We could feel there's a bit of pressure on. A lot of other boats in the vicinity, and we chose to cut to an A3. So we're going for more of a reachy kite, and the next shot shows what the A3 ended up looking like. So it lasted for 30 seconds less.
I think we can throw in a little bit of truth there as well. We were kind of an outboard lead on the big jib, and we were. There's no secrets here. Joker 2, which the younger brother here at the front of the room happened to be on board. There was quite a bit of competition between the two J109s, and we were pretty much neck and neck. And they threw up their A3, and
we cursed them for a while.
We need to put up our A3, and. Maybe a testament there to Prof. That's our A3 in the bin. And
Thank you, Kenny, for the endorsement.
No worries. The invoice is in the post, Prof.
But yeah, so it was. That was the first kick in the teeth we got there. Now I have to say we were still in good shape, still in a good patch of water, still heading the right direction. Everyone's still safe, so it was still good. But there was a little bit of heads down. We were left with slightly less options then because we had 2 running kites, a 2 and a 4. So we really had, the only one we could refly was the 4. This is our A4. So it's generally a heavier weather kite for running. Wasn't exactly optimal for what we were doing there. And the wind at this stage was building. I think we were in the kind of 20s to mid 20s at this point. So it was still good. You can see the next couple of shots are heading off towards the fastnet, and yeah, everyone got a bit of grub on board and just got closer and closer to the fastnet. Still a beautiful evening. You can see it's absolutely glorious out there. So spirits are still pretty high. Got around the fastnet, heading to Skelligs, and it just got a bit colder, a bit darker. Anybody who was out there will be able to tell you it got very, very, very chilly. And as we got around past the Skelligs and started heading a little bit more northerly, we were then heading into pretty heavy Atlantic swell. It was more kind of northerly direction, and as we started converging with the shores, that was bouncing off the shores and causing a very, very sharp cross wave going across. So the seas became more and more confused. A lot of people started getting ill. From talking to many of the boats that we came in, pretty much the entire fleet was in seriously bad shape about maybe 3 hours after this shot, and it just got worse and worse and worse. So yeah, do you want to take it from
Yeah, so as you can see from this last photo we have of the fastnet, as John says, it was absolutely idyllic. And yeah, we made 1 or 2 small errors, which is hands up. We had rigged a reef line because if anybody remembers the summer that's just been, there was no wind, and we were expecting this to be a drift around Ireland. So we'd only rigged really a reef line, which was a mistake, because when you need to put in the second reef, usually it's pretty full on at that stage. So there was some inventive skills in putting in the second reef line, and it got kind of worse and worse, and we'd eaten, as you can see, and we were into eventually, basically, our sail plan got down as far as the J4, which is is known as the heavy weather jib, but it's basically the smallest jib without going to the storm jib that we would fly. And we were 2 reefs in the main, and for most racing boats these days, you'll put 2 reefs in a racing mainsail. If it's a cruising mainsail, you put a deep third reef, and some race boats will go with a deep third reef, especially short-handed boats. But we had as many reefs in as we could go to, so we were fully reefed, 2 reefs in a J4, and it was getting a bit bumpy. And as it got a bit bumpy, we had just had a delicious chicken curry there, which is absolutely top notch, and we had some delicious chicken curry as well, but it was in a bag. And it did reappear, Prof. You're 100% correct. One crewman was actually so skilled that I knew that this was going to be a problem. So I went downstairs after he reappeared slightly. How do we say, with a small bit of evidence on himself, and I just said this would be a problem when other people go downstairs, so I started clearing up downstairs, and I just couldn't get rid of the smell, and I had spray bleach out and everything, and really couldn't get rid of the smell until about 2 days later. He'd actually been so skilled he managed to get it inside the chart table, which was
So I think we figured afterwards it was on top, and that little draining hole, or the little hole you stick your finger in to lift it up, went in there.
So that'll paint a picture to you that it was rough, it was miserable, it was cold. We had been set up for what we thought was a light air, sunny, 10, 15 knot lap around Ireland, and all of a sudden it was proper Round Ireland conditions. Usually get a nice southwesterly off the west coast, but as John said, we were a bit north of Skelligs now. We were into a northerly, and it turned into the upwind Round Ireland 2018. Yeah. So we had some people, as I just said, who got ill, others that got ill and didn't quite need to relieve their stomachs. So we had a couple of people downstairs at this stage. So and talking to other boats, there were a lot of people on other boats who were downstairs as well at this stage. So we'd sent 1 or 2 people down below and just told them just to kind of ride it out. John had been doing a top job on driving at this stage, and we were rotating the helm between the drivers. And one thing that was great about this race that John and I and Michael talked about from the get-go with this race is it is an offshore race. There's no point in having 3 rockstar drivers. You need to have, on a boat of 8, you need to have 8 rockstar drivers. So everybody on the boat could drive, which meant we could swap over a lot, which was fantastic, and which is what we were doing through the night. Happy for me to continue?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can actually see, I think, if you hop back maybe 3 shots, you can see when you're cutting to the kites. Go back another 2, maybe another 1 past that, another 1. So yeah, you can see. So we were cut down. This is on the 3 we had. Like we had the 2 on deck. So even before we were getting out towards where we were going to round up, we'd already started checking out the breeze that was coming up. And you can see we've got I think this is the code 4 jib up on deck to get it battened, because we just were not expecting to get this kind of weather in. So you can see that we'd already started to try pre-plan it when we got there, started loading in reef lines when we got around the corner. And if you go on then, you can see us sort of stuffed it back in a bag by the time we get to here. But we still didn't think we'd actually have to go to it. So we began to get this realization as we got to the corner anyway, how bad it was going to be.
And we had been, it's a key point of John's, just to show you how much we weren't expecting this bad weather. The only jibs we actually battened up prior to the start was the J1 and the J2. The J3 and the J4 we left bricked in their bags and actually hid them, not hid them for any reason, but put them away right up in the bow underneath the V-berths, because we were like, we're never going to see these sails, but we carried them, A, for the regs, and B, just in case, thankfully just in case. So that would just show we really weren't expecting the weather to be as bad. One of the other things which is great about modern sailboat racing is the technology that's available to us now, and that has become available in such a short period of time. And we didn't have any fantastic super-fangled computers or anything like that. We had an iPad. And we were downloading weather constantly and we were looking at this weather system that was developing constantly. Between all the crew, we were looking at this, and we were going, this is actually going to be a lot worse than what was expected. So, and that's one of the key things as well. Isn't it? We had phone contact. I suppose the only thing that we had that was kind of slightly out there, but I do use the word slightly, is we did have an Iridium Go, which is just like a satellite dongle, basically. You can rent them for a couple of quid for a race like this. So you probably got the picture. It was fairly miserable. We had a couple of people downstairs, and I suppose I was up the front, and we were kind of pounding through a few waves, and kind of looked back at John. I'd been downstairs a few times, and I said to him, do you want a spell? Which is, do you want me to take over? So John said, thank you very much, that'll be lovely. It was nothing like that, I can assure you. I
actually looked down the hatch and I couldn't see him straight at this stage. We were just pounding into waves so hard for so long at this stage that you're so focused on this blackness and trying to get the horizon right that I looked down and I was going, I'm probably all right, and I just couldn't actually see your face. So like, you're probably right. Take the helm. I can't see straight.
So I shuffled down to the back of the boat, and John was clipped on. I'd been clipped on, and it was a bumpy sea, as John talked about, the bad seaway coming off the shore and then coming back out to us. So we had a particularly bumpy seaway. I shuffled in behind John where I could clip on. Like, John could kind of talk to me about the handover, about what numbers he was reading, etc., so I could be settled in. Just to give you an idea how black it was, like, this was a black night. A J109 is not a big boat. Anybody who's been offshore in one can definitely testify it is not a big boat. And I could barely see the bow. And like, the bow is only 30 foot from me when I'm steering. So it was a particularly black, dark night. You could see nothing. The only thing you could really see was the red glow of the instruments. That's it. So I shuffled in behind John and I clipped. And one of the key things here is in the lessons learned is thankfully the regs were brought in this year that we had short tethers and long tethers. I did hear a comment before the race. I won't tell you who it was, when someone was showing the new tether and they said, Jesus, that's great. You can now be 3 meters away from where you're clipped onto. Which, for those who aren't aware, that's the wrong idea. You have a midpoint tether, which is what goes onto the life jacket here on your clip-on point. Then you have a short tether to keep you close to the point. And then you have a long tether if you need to do some work further away from yourself. But it's not designed to go this far away. So I shuffled in beside John, clipped myself on to one of the jack lines, because they run that far back on a J109. And I kind of settled into the groove. John went forward, and I watched him, and he kind of went downstairs, got a bit of grub, was kind of sitting in the cockpit area of the J109, happy out, and kind of sorting himself out, pulling, and we did have the minimum amount of gear, so pulling what gear he had onto himself, and I was driving along, and every now and then you can see the crest of a wave, and all you can see really in the crest wave in those conditions are just this kind of wall of white. And even in those conditions you try and call wave for the rest of the crew. Now it means absolutely nothing, because they've got all their high-vis vests down over them, and they're huddled down like this, they can't hear you, and it's just another pounding, another soaking for them. And as a helm you might turn your head back so you don't get the thump of it. For whatever reason with this wave, timing is a horrible thing, but John had kind of tidied himself up and was turning around to go forward and go up on the rail. Correct me if I'm wrong here now, of course, but 1 foot up on the coach roof, 1 foot on a hand on the winch, the other hand leading his tether up to the weather rail, and as he was doing this I called wave, and I didn't look back this time for whatever reason, God knows why, and in that calling wave I followed John from where he was through underneath the boom, over a winch and over a stanchion and man overboard.
And there it was, gone.
Gone.
So it literally happened that fast. From my point of view, hindsight's a great thing, but when you come off the helm after helming for that amount of time in that kind of a seaway, you're stiff, you're cold. I had, hilarious looking at it now, I had realised on the previous off watch just how cold it was, and I'd gone downstairs and put on every last stitch of clothes I had. Every last stitch of clothes, which, as you saw earlier on, wasn't a whole lot. I didn't bring a lot of gear, but everything was on me. And I regretted that about 20 minutes later, all right. But so I was just about warm, had come off the helm and was going to go sit up on the rail. At this stage, most people were, I think we had 2 downstairs, and we had, everyone else was either huddled on the rail, trying to get huddled up to each other for warmth, slumped over winches, or just, hanging out wherever they could possibly get any shelter. From the previous sail that we had taken down, we had rammed into a bag and was still under their arses on the side deck. So they were just plonked on that. So foolishly, I had pity on them and didn't sit at the back. I said, I'll take one for the team. I can eat it. And I said I'd go forward. So I said I'd go to the front of the stack. So I shuffled from where I was in the cockpit, and I had been downstairs a little. I had gone down looking for something. I think I came up, clipped back in the cockpit around where the winches are in the cockpit there, but there were people there. There was a sail bag there, so I was reaching underneath, clipping onto something, and then going forward. So I'd reached forward onto the coach roof. I couldn't step down here because people were on the rail, so just facing forward. So we ended up going, if you can picture the boat heeled, I went on the fine line along the top there and tried, like an idiot, to walk, step across on the fine point on the top of that coach roof. So if the boat's heeled like that, I heard the yell from Kenny, and I had my second clip in my hand because I was trying to get it to the rail, and I couldn't reach the rail. Heard the yell for this wave, and the boat lurched as the wave hit me, and I just went straight down. So from standing to the lower side, split second, landed on I think my right shoulder, and my head clobbered the deck on the way out. So I was a bit stunned and winded as I went over. Distinctly remember getting a hand to the upper guard wire as I went through, and caught a bit of a handhold of that. And I remember this moment, kind of in the middle of the Jesus. I had this moment where I felt someone grab my feet. I went, thank God, someone got my feet. Because I'd hammered the stanchion. I knew I'd hammered the stanchion against my leg. Still have swelling in my leg from it now. But this moment where I realised I was outside the boat now, had about maybe 3 fingernails on this thin piece of wire from the outside of the boat, but at least someone had my legs. And then I realised my legs were wet. And then I realised it wasn't somebody had me, it was the water had started tugging me into the water. And when you, which I wouldn't have thought of before, when you get dragged a little bit in the water and then dumped from the front, you literally plough straight headfirst into the water and go straight down. So dunked from minute 1, probably swallowed a bit of water, not too bad, but I just remember coming back up and in the middle of getting my head around it, just going, bollocks. I was pretty unimpressed with myself, I have to say. As I said, like we've all sailed a long time. It's a very experienced crew, and I've done some stupid things on boats, but this was right up there. Sorry, my wife has heard this entire story, all warts and all, a couple of times now, I'm sure. But yeah, immediately, maybe amazingly, this calmness came over me. I was in the water, came up, the life jacket immediately went off. A couple of demos of them, but you'll see these in a couple of minutes. This was the life jacket. So I kind of had a picture in my head that a life jacket would go off. It's like an airbag in a car, which I'd imagine is bad news if you're already in a bit of a panic. But it bursts from where you have the pack and it peels away. So essentially you're sitting out of the water and it starts peeling around and inflates pretty gradually. And that was pretty calming for me, I've got to say. It wasn't like an airbag at all. So the thing went off. I bounced up to the surface with it. And it was so fast that by the time the stern of the boat was clearing me, it had already fully inflated. And I was up on top of the water, coughing up water, trying to get some words out, and just man overboard. And yeah, that was the incident of going over. I had about another 3-4 minutes of kind of getting myself together. I saw the guys going away. I remember yelling to Kenny, "Take your time, I'm okay." I didn't feel hurt. I felt a bit bashed, a bit winded, but I didn't feel like I'd actually been injured getting overboard. So I yelled at the guys, "Take your time." I know they're all great sailors, so I didn't have any fears. A lot of people have asked me that in the interim period. I never, ever, ever had any doubt it was going to be a successful recovery. I know these guys really well, and I never had any doubts at all. It never even crossed my mind that it wasn't going to be successful. So I had about maybe 3 minutes of sitting there in the water. It's pretty odd, right, watching a boat go away for you into the darkness, and still pretty wild, probably about 30 to 35 knots blowing at that stage, really, really cold. And I just sat there looking at all the gear on me. We'll give you a run through in a little while. But I had a fully loaded spin-lock deck vest that I'd only gotten about in the previous month before I went away. And it had little AIS pack on it. It had little strobe lights on it. It had a EPIRB that I have as well, that I had for a couple of years. So it was fully stacked. So I spent a couple of minutes literally going through everything going, "Check this out." And little fingers on my shoulder, "Check this out." So literally went through the whole thing, made sure the AIS was pinging. You can see a strobe going on it. You can see the aerial is extended on it. So I knew it was all working all right. And then I checked my my EPIRB, because my PLB has a manual switch and a switch that'll go off in the water. So I actually switched that off. So I figured if the AIS is going, everyone around here is going to be able to see where I am and what's going on. So I didn't think there's any point in going for a full the full EPIRB. Yes.
Did the waves going over your head or anything? Or?
Yeah, it was lovely for a minute or two. It's a good point. I distinctly remember the boat heading off and Kenny yelling everybody to get up. I distinctly remember being able to hear you yelling, "Anybody who's able, that's up on deck, stay on deck. Anybody who's not, get downstairs." And I could hear all this going on. So when you're that low to the water, there was such a sea state. I was actually able to hear quite a lot of what was going on the boat for quite a far distance off. You could hear quite a lot. And the kind of the roaring of the wind, you don't get that as much when you're right down at sea level. But I do remember the boat passing by as he did it bear away, and it came within spitting distance of the boat as they went downwind. And I was literally looking up, and I think Diarmuid had gone up at the bow at that stage to try and get the jib sorted. And he was literally looking at me as I was going by, and I was like, "Oh yep," just cruising on by. So it was okay, but they cruised on by going downwind, and I remember just watching them. And as the jib came down, the main, we're going into the bit, but the main blew out of the track. So we had the mainsail swinging free in the breeze. And I remember looking and kind of going, this could get complicated. This could get a little bit more complicated, but still never had any doubts. They're going to get it together. They're well able for it. But I remembered watching that, and everything went quiet, incredibly quiet. And then I realized I was in the trough of a wave, and a wave broke over me and rolled me a few times. So it was at that point that I went, this has got a hood on it. So I pulled the hood out, as you'll see on these. So reached behind me. I thought it'd be more difficult, but actually there's a tether on it there, a little black line. And just reached behind me, popped the hood over, and it's got one of these structured kind of hoods. So it pops up. Now you don't see a huge amount. It wasn't exactly like a great visibility in it, but it kept everything out, and the entire thing pulls down completely over the bladders. So you're sealed in a bubble that sits over your head. These are all the Spinlock are the ones that we all had on board. It's just the particular brand we had. But, and I know there are lots of other brands out there, I will sing the praise of these because I genuinely think it saved my life. But it really has all the bells and whistles on it. We're going to go through a bit of a demo of these life jackets, so we'll talk through the various bits and bobs of them.
We'll do a demonstration now in a second, but just to highlight, because we're going to do this now in 1 second, but there was two big things. So John he's just talked through all the bits he had, which is great. There was two big things in the life jacket. had for me as a driver and for the rest of the crew that were absolutely phenomenal, and it's a good idea just to think about for future offshore races. I suppose the first bit, thanks to my lovely assistant, are the lights. So not only does the Spinlock is the light out on a stalk like this, which if we compare to another life jacket just over here, whose brand shall remain nameless, but the light is actually down quite low. Actually, you have to lift up the life jacket here and go on my tippy toes, but the light is actually down quite low, whereas on the Spinlock, they have this pylon system, which is kind of like a little alien's eye, which is actually, it's up quite high in the life jacket, up on where the user's shoulder would be. So that was one phenomenal bit for me, is the visual of this light. The second phenomenal bit, which we're hoping to demonstrate now, we haven't prepped this. So this could go wrong, so I'm going to let Ian set up here while I talk through it. But the second bit is John's holding it up there, it's a part that can be retrofitted to any life jacket, but it's the Spinlock Lumon technology, and they're a little sticky light that you stick on below the bladder, and it's lit by water, by activation with water. But what it hopefully we'll be able to demonstrate here is that it actually, the whole bladder glows. So as a visual reference point for a driver in the middle of the night in pitch black conditions, I could see John the whole time. So I'll just let Ian get this sorted here, and then we'll just show you. Are we alive, Ian? Oh, there we go. Yeah, just knock the three of those there. It'd be great. Yeah, you got a bit of it. Need more water. There's a glass there, I think, beside you.
Also, it's important to note that, I know this sounds like a promo for Spinlock, but
none of us work for Spinlock.
We don't work for Spinlock. But these sticky pads that are just shown around here, they can be retrofitted to any life jacket. It literally is just a light that sticks on behind the bladder, and it just glows out through. Equally, the little they call it a pylon light. I'm sure there's other version of it, but it's just stuck on with a Velcro, and then you tie it onto your life jacket. So you can retrofit it to any life jacket as well.
So you can, hopefully everybody can see there, it needs to be fully immersed, and we're not getting wet again, or certainly John's not. But you can see here the whole bladder of the life jacket glows, which is absolutely phenomenal. And that was one of the key things for me. There you go. That was one of the key things as a driver and for the rest of the crew, as to actually see John visually in the water, because there's even a bit of ambient light here left over, but there was no light. It was pitch black, and having the whole life jacket plus the light glowing like that, we had a really good visual point of where John was in the water. Visually, a visual reference point.
So you can see the strobe going off as well, and that being just half a foot above your shoulder. Sure, if you're in a huge swell, you're only going to see it every once in a while, but it's a great visual from a distance. Then on the inside, so it has the stalk packed on the inside, it has the two patches on the inside, it has a AIS on one side, it has my PLB on the other side, and it has the other pack for inflation over there. And that's still pretty compact, fully loaded life jacket.
Yeah, you've so one big thing was the visual for me. So John's obviously overboard. There was a word spoken when John did go overboard, and instantly the two big things that happened to me that were absolutely fantastic. And I don't work for Spinlock, but I will stand up quite happily and sing the praise of the Spinlock life jacket. First one being the light, as we just all saw. The second key thing was the AIS MOB device became mandatory this year for all the Rourke races, and the Round Ireland being involved with Rourke. The AIS became mandatory this year. Now, Spinlock, you don't need to buy it through Spinlock to do it this way, but Spinlock do sell the AIS pre-rigged on the life jacket like this. This device, and this is one here, it does not automatically activate on contact with water. Most personal AISs or PLBs, which are kind of the person version of EPIRB, don't activate on contact with water, because if you're a bowman on a boat, you've got water spraying down you the whole time, and there'd be a chopper following you around a race course. That'd be pointless. So you can buy the unit like this, and a lot of people bought the AIS unit, and rather than fitting it to their life jacket, quite simply put it into their hip pocket or their oilies, or stuck it into their pocket for going around the race. The way the AIS device is rigged, and you can do it on any life jacket, is it comes like this, and this part of it here clips on to the oral inflation tube of the life jacket. You can take this little bracket off, not so carefully, but you can take it off. And there's a little line here which is adjustable in length. You pass this line around the bladder, and then you clip the AIS device back in with the bladder in between this line. The idea being is when the bladder of the life jacket inflates, so when it goes from the non-inflated mode here to inflated, it breaks the activation part, which is just under here. This one isn't armed because it has the plastic cover on it, but it breaks this automatically, thus automatically activating the AIS man overboard device, which is unique. Just to what was kind of available and what was mandatory in some Cat 1 and Cat 0 races before this is the PLB, is the personal EPIRB. The differences between the two are as follows. The AIS device will send a signal which is picked up by your VHF radio and a VHF antenna, and is displayed on the chart plotter of your boat and all the boats in your vicinity that there is a man overboard in the water, and because it's transmitting the whole time, transmits that position live back to the chart plotter or laptop, whatever you're using on your boat, to receive AIS information. So that's a key thing. It's transmitted to your boat and all the boats in the vicinity of you, plus it sets off a DSC alarm on your radio. By contrast, the PLB, which was mandatory in races like the Sydney Hobart and other Cat 1 and Cat 0 races, but not Cat 2, is it's manually activated only. This is a dummy, just in case somebody gets worried here. But when you activate this one, and the aerial goes up in the air, you have to hold it, because it doesn't fit under the bladder. And the second thing is, this does not send a signal back to your boat, nor does it send a signal to any other boats in your vicinity. The signal goes straight up to the satellite system, to the COSPAS SARSAT satellite system, which then sends that signal on to a ground station, and it's eventually interpreted by the Coast Guard. But meaning that the boats that are in the immediate vicinity of a man overboard can't see him, have no idea where he is. So that's one thing that should be keenly taken into account, and all good channelries that are selling these devices will be able to fill you in on that information as to what device is most suitable for you. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the PLB. This would certainly be suited to double-handed and solo sailors, but certainly for a fully crewed boat, the AIS device is worth its weight in gold, because the final bit on that was whether or not, and I assume the system is programmed to do it, but we had B&G instruments, Brookhouse and Gates instruments on the mast, indicating boat speed and wind angle and so on and so forth. We then had more of those Brookhouse and Gates. Maybe Glyn, you can go back to a slide of the boat. Back. Even there, yeah. So, perfect, back one. There, yeah, lovely. So we had what's known as your 2020s on the mast, and a Velocitech to fill out the bracket. We then had our two B&G controllers here on the kind of the coaming just over the companionway entrance. But in the middle here, we had a Raymarine multifunction display, which is being Raymarine was linked directly to our Raymarine plotter, which was all new. The B&G system is old. It's a old H2000 system, but the Raymarine stuff was all brand new. But that display, when the radio received the AIS signal that it was a man overboard, that display instantly gave me range and bearing back to John. So I had a digital signal and I had a visual by the lights, and it was all worked automatically. But because the reason why it worked automatically was we programmed everything for it to work automatically.
So
No idea
it
where we
does.
are now.
It does. Oh yeah, obviously we keep going. We'll wing it. So it is important that. So PLBs, there is a use case for them. If you're far offshore, if you're alone out there, there's a very definite use case for them. It's satellites. It talks directly to satellites. But in our situation, I knew when I went in the water, we had several boats. We looked at the nav all the way along. We knew there were boats around. We could see boats around. I knew there was a huge amount of people who all had to have AIS on board. So I knew that AIS was going to ping absolutely everyone. I looked back over the tracker. We might try get to around 1 a.m. on the tracker if we can. We looked back over the tracker, and we can actually see the minutes leading up to when I went overboard. So it's happened pretty much exactly at 1 a.m. And you can see the track of other boats around us leading up to it. And when we get to exactly 1 a.m., you can see 2 boats who are behind us. The only 2 I could spot, Yo-Yo and Wakey Wakey. And they literally, at 1 a.m., they both turned and pointed exactly towards us. So it did its job, not just for
there,
us.
Glenn.
Yeah.
Don't know if you can see the track there. I don't know, Glenn, how carefully you can go back, but this is Jedi here. It's very hard to see on the screen. Just to point out some boats who did call into us, and we will be forever grateful them calling to us. I don't know if they're here or have any representatives here, but the alarms went off in these boats because they're in our vicinity. But you've got Wakey Wakey, a fellow J109 here, Roger Smith, and you've got Yo-Yo here, Brendan Coughlin, new Sunfast 3600 this year. But both those they're competitors, but in a situation like this, they're not. You're no longer a competitor. But they did call into us. But yeah, sorry, John.
Yeah. That's it. There are use cases for these things on the AIS in this kind of close quarters racing. Even though I know it's around Ireland, it's a long distance, but for a lot of it, you are within a fleet of people who are very, very close to your vicinity. So definitely would like to acknowledge the fact that people didn't just see this happen and notice and go, "Hope he's all right, he or she," but people actually used the equipment, saw the equipment, and came for us. But a lot of this comes down to we looked at the now both Kenny and myself both like toys, so we like to play with the toys. So when we got this notification in the months coming up to Round Ireland that we had to have the AIS, I'm sure along with many people would have gone, "Oh jeez, how much is that going to cost?" It's a couple £100 to get it. It's a pricey piece of kit, but I looked it up, and it is an amazing piece of kit for the size of it. It's the size of a pencil, and it is just an amazing piece of kit. So I took out the manual, and there's quite a lot of stuff to have to go through to do it. Yes, Spinlock, and I'm sure others will start putting out the service that you buy it from them and they'll pack it for you, because if you pack it wrong, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. So it has to be rigged properly to go around the bladder, because the bladder is basically the thing that's going to pull the ripcord and set it off. And also, not only it clips in here, you can see it's quite easy to clip in and clip out. So it just goes onto the tube there. When the bladder goes off, that'll pull the ripcord on. You also have to tie this to your life jacket somewhere, because when the ripcord gets pulled and it gets blasted off your buoyancy out of your life jacket, it's just going to keep on going. You need to tie it to your life jacket. So you have to read the instructions. You can go through a whole kind of coding process on your PC at home and get it to be registered to you and know who you are and all that sort of stuff as well. What amazed me when I chatted to people in the bar here when we came back at the end of Round Ireland, and in many bars since, not that I hang on bars alone, but many conversations, is the amount of people, as Kenny said, bought the AIS because they had to and put it in their pocket. So it lived here for the entire time. I wouldn't have fancied being in my situation and have to go, how does this work? And try to figure out in the water how it worked in the dark. So part of this was that I bought a life jacket. I actually brought along my old one just to show how bad it could have been. This was bought rather quickly, won't go with brand, but bought rather quickly down in Cork one day when I was getting an offer to go out sailing. And it's just cheap jacket, because I just wanted to grab a cheap jacket and go out in the water. And when I knew I was going to do a bit of sailing, setting off with on the Three Peaks with Steve Hayes there this summer, and this and a couple of other things, so I went out and invested in the jacket. And I genuinely think it would have been a very different situation if I didn't have all the gear. The AIS, the fully loaded life jacket. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to try find me in the water. I don't know how you would have got me out of the water. I don't know whether it would have supported me. Who knows? So, yeah, glad to have the kit. But yes, you have to put the time into actually setting the kit up properly, coding it right if you want to have your details in it, and setting it right in your life jacket.
So I think we've laboured the life jacket was phenomenal. So just to recap, the situation we now had was that we had John on the water. We still had 7 other people on board Jedi. I happened to be driving. We had 2 people down below, and the remainder on deck with me behind the wheel. So the next kind of bits I'm going to talk all happened simultaneously, so I'm not putting them in any particular order, but I will stress here what happened next and what happened simultaneously. There was no shouting, there was no roaring, there was no finger pointing. Everybody went to a position and everybody got the job done, and we got back to John and we had him recovered. I think if you go the whole thing in the tracker, when we're back on course, it's 15 minutes or something. You can verify that tonight when you get home if you want. But so we had a man overboard. So the first shout out of me was man overboard, man overboard, man overboard. Like I would teach day in, day out. That's what you do when we got a man overboard. Instantly the crew jumped. Michael was beside me, and he went to being my spotter, and he had been pretty much in a slumber. Phil, Gunnar, straight up, and we instantly were like, right, we bore off a little bit and we went straight into getting the jib down. So Diarmid went up on the bow, clipped on, of course. Lads in the pit, one onto the main sheet. Gunnar onto the main sheet, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Onto the main sheet. Phil, I think, in the pit, if I'm correct. Can't remember. It all happened. Jib came down. Now, one thing that did happen when the jib came down, which is it's blowing 35 knots, your sails are, your reef lines are tight, your halyards tight, everything's tight. And our halyards were around the drum to try and take the pressure off the rope being in the clutch, because if the rope's in the clutch too long, it does have the potential, even though everything was new on the boat, to wear through the outer core of the rope, and then your halyards fall down in the middle of the night, and that's just miserable. So they were around the drum, but in releasing the ropes off the drums to get the sails down, or to get just the jib down, the intention was to just get the jib down. The pressure came off the main halyard, and the main halyard was a bolt rope. It wasn't on sliders, and the bolt rope blew out of the track of the mast, leaving just the head of the sail in the mast attached by the slug, and then a loose luff knocking the mainsail to shite as well. So the original intention was just to get the jib down, and now we had to get a mainsail under control as well, which was fruity. While all this was happening, there was a specific decision, and it wasn't a decision, it was all followed naturally, was that we didn't need 10 people on deck, or 7 people as the case would be on deck, to get through all these jobs. The deck was not a total mess, but there was a lot going on. But we also needed people down below. So young Lorcan here, straight onto the radio, without being asked to do so, knew what he had to do, pressed the big red button, made a call straight into the Coast Guard, and then was able to chat to the Coast Guard, give them all the information. We had our Mayday procedures stuck up on the bulkhead with the name of the boat, the call sign, and the MSI all there, ready to go. So hats off to Lorcan, fair play on that. Kylie, knowing it was going to be a successful recovery, I hope, it started to get stuff ready for John, as in, we're going to get a cold, wet, miserable person back on board this boat. What is he going to need to recover him? So talking about the things that we carried a little bit extra beyond the regs, we carried thermal protective aids, and John will talk about that a little bit more once he got back on board. Coast Guard instantly, as we got the helicopter in the air and on the way to us, Lorcan was able to correlate with them. Wakey and Yo-Yo did bear off. I think if you look in the tracker in detail, you can see them bear off towards John's position almost instantly as well, and that just showed you the depth and quality of people sailing that, you know, they neglected their race instantly to come and assist a boat in distress. We got the mainsail under control. Lads, quite literally, Phil and Gunnar, both bodies on the line to get the mainsail down and get it controlled and get it lashed around the boom. And we did a downwind dive, as is taught, to go downwind back to the victim. Engine was started in amongst all of this. Once again, in our prep, engine had been fully serviced, checked over, and we knew we had enough diesel per the regs and a little bit extra. So engine started, first time, straight into gear, because we now had to use the engine. And using the engine, 35 knots of breeze in a big lumpy swell, might sound like it was an awful lot easier, but it's not actually, because every now and then the prop will clear the water slightly. So, but you know, we got downwind. Through all of this constant visual on John and the water, we came back up to John and in our dial down. So instead of, for those who may have done some formal courses, they do this thing called a crash tack. Slightly irrelevant, if I'm honest, in 35 knots of breeze. But we got the sails down, then came through the wind, then went downwind. We came back, and in the first attempt, and I actually wouldn't use the word attempt, first pass, we had contact with John. Gunnar had contact with John. John and I had a chat in a pub. Where else would you? So John actually just gives a very good recount of this on his first contact back with the boat. So I'm going to hand back over to John here on this.
Sure, yeah. So, yeah, it's obviously a very different perspective from 37 meters off the water than it is up on deck. So from my point of view, it was great hearing. I know everyone is always taught this thing of, you know, very clear instructions, speak loud, speak clearly, be very succinct. But when you're a victim in the water and you can hear the guys on board saying these things, it's extremely reassuring. I could see them dial down, I could see the lights change, you can see on the rig, so you can see exactly what direction they were going, and I could see they were coming back for me. I could hear a little bit of cursing when the main split off, which obviously, as I said before, looked like things were going to get a bit more complicated. But they swept down past me. At that point, I was pretty comfortable in the water, and I know I said to plenty of people, those couple of minutes in the water when it was all just pretty silent, and I was watching the guys dial down, and yeah, they're going about the right way. I remember thinking to myself, this is the warmest I've been for about 12 hours. I was toasty. A couple of minutes before, I'd been so cold that I'd gotten the wrists and the ankles when I was still on deck, and I tightened the entire thing up, so I was completely sealed in. So there I was, bobbing around the water, hermetically sealed into this thing with all the kit on me blowing, and I could see the guys are doing their job. So there was no fear in it at all. So that first pass, they came down, they probably, as I said before, came within a couple of meters of me, nearly reach out. I started swimming towards the line of the boat as they came down, but I could see they were just on the dial down, so they just swept past. I think I was chatting to Diarmaid on the bows, went past. They came back for their first actual attempt to come up and grab me. So as they wound up, I was on their port side from recollection, and just as I came up along the beam, Gunnar appeared up above me, because from on the water, all you see is a lot of white on the side of the boat, and you're going, okay, I could get slammed here because there's still a pretty big sea. And next thing, Gunnar appeared and had an arm reached out to me. So we made contact, grabbed arms, firm hold, and thought, this is great. And I remembered getting swept back, and he kind of lurched towards me as my weight came on him. And I remember looking at him and looking down and going, are you clipped on? And they'd been doing jobs on the boat, and he literally just jumped down to grab me, as he would, because I was right there. And I said, you're not clipped on. And he wasn't clipped on. So I let go. I still remember your face when I drifted off again. But a bit of a panic moment there, I'd imagine. But from personal point of view, we go way back. I know your wife and kids. There was no way I was going to have two people in the water for my sake. And still, it comes back to, I trusted the gear, I trusted the crew. There was never any doubt that they were going to come back another time. So why put them at risk? So it was a split-second call, but yeah, I let go and bobbed off again. And as I watched the transom move away from me. Did have a moment or two to think and go, was that the right call? I'm not sure. But yeah, the guys headed off, and I could see them just getting it under control again. At this stage, I'd been dunked a couple of times in pretty big waves, so between the passes, I was popping the hood back up again. So I didn't think of the hood when I first fell in the water, but on their downwind, their first downwind pass that went by, as I mentioned earlier on, got dunked in a wave, and then remembered this hood. So the hood is up every time they're heading away from me at this point. So you've got limited visibility. You can see all right, but with the water streaming down the front of it, you don't see a whole lot of detail, but I can make out the boat. And as I went from maybe 50 meters away, all you could see is the lights. So as a sailor, obviously we know the configuration of the lights, and I was able to watch. There's white. I can see a green. I can see red and green. I can see it dipping down again. So I was able to watch the form of where they were going in their figure of 8 to come back up and get me. So I knew the guys were all over it. And on their second attempt to approach, we'll say, I knew they were coming up to me. Do you want to talk to you a bit?
Yeah, so when John made the decision that he was letting go, I understandably was kind of like, not quite sure on this decision, if I'm honest. And I do distinctly remember him turning around to me and going, Kenny, you've got this. So, and he let go. I was like, right, apparently I have this. So we went off again, and we came back up. And one of the key things is, if we remember back, I don't need to go back on the slides again, but one of the things, if you remember, the boat was prepped. And one of the things in boat prep, a racing boat, is that hull was wet sanded below the water line. So the anti-foul still is as slippery as it can be. And the top sides were coated in many, many, many layers of McLube anti-foul alternative. So like slippery as hell. So you have a boat approaching, and he puts his hands up to grip. And it is literally like putting your hand on the slipperiest glass you've ever seen in your life. So there's nothing for him to grab onto. So I absolutely can't remember. We talked about it the other night over some non-alcoholic beers in the pub. Over who came up with the decision, I can't remember. So it may have been Gunnar, may have been Phil, can't remember. Please do shout out who it was. We actually had some extra tethers.
I think it was
Boydie, okay. And so we had some extra tethers. We had some spares, as in we held on to the old style tethers, which were these guys. Were just a clip on each end, or this would be cow hitched on. And we had extras from the guys being down below, that we actually cow hitched the tether onto the base of the stanchion, and then draped these tethers over the side of the boat. So this part was onto the base of the stanchion on the side of the boat, and then this was draped over the side. So as we came up to John on the second pass, it gave him something that he could hold on to. And it gave him something firmly he could hold on to. And as he'll tell you, as his hand slipped down, it stopped his hand going beyond the clip. We did have all of the toys. We had 2 horseshoe buoys, brand new ones with the boat's name on it, all brand new. Lights, drogues on them, inflatable horseshoe or inflatable Dan buoy, throw bags, all the rest of it. But this was going to be the best solution. So coming up the second time, slight bit more prep. The boat had been tidied up a little bit on the deck, and we had, based off a couple of the base of stanchions, these tethers draped in the water, ready for John to grab onto and clip onto.
She's a good point as well, I think of it. So all of this worked on this occasion, largely because of the skill of the crew. Also, I guess, because I was a conscious and uninjured victim in the water, who was aware, knew what was going on. So, yes, we're recounting what worked for us. This is not definitive that this will work every time. Every situation is going to be different. But this did work for us. There will be occasions when throwing out the life ring is the right thing to do. So, obviously, do whatever you have to. In this case, I was awake, I was alive, I knew exactly what was going on. When I went past that first time, there was nothing to hold on to. So as we were departing that first time, there was conversations like going on. And when they came back the last time, I could see these over the side from a distance, and I was like... So as the boat approached, they were coming around this time, leaving me to starboard. I swept along the side of the boat and could see from a distance, pop the hood, chatting to Dermot on the bow again, how's it going? And swept past, and I could see the tethers. So I reached down and got my tethers up, and got the longer bungee tether, and just waited as I slipped down the side of the boat, and waited till I get to that. And when I got to it, grabbed near enough towards the end and just lifted up and clipped mine into it and gave it a good tug, and it took the load, and it swept me up right up to where Gunnar was. So you sweep up with the boat, and he then had a tether on himself at that point, and was able to clip onto me and haul me right up to the boat. So at that point, I think about 20 hands came out and grabbed me from every direction. So it was a bit of relief.
Had 2 people on board just hitting away, by the way.
So yeah, there was a couple of minutes of thank God we got him, and then there was how the hell do we get him back? So we more lines, and basically shimmied towards the back of the boat, and I went in around the transom. We didn't unclip the back. People were saying, did they unclip the lines at the back and step on board? But don't unclip the lines at the back of the boat, so that it'd be easier for the person to come in, because you're more likely in high seas of that for someone to just fall out the back of the boat. So we left the lifelines as they were. I came around the back of the boat and just went in, scooted in underneath the bottom lifeline, and again about 20 people appeared and hauled me onto the boat. And from memory, at least 2, if not 3 people sat on me on the transom, probably more out of relief than anything else. But yeah, after a few moments of that, I think I remember saying, can you all just get off me now so I can get into the boat? So I had legs dangling over the back. But yeah, the aftermath was in a way as important as the rest, in that I got myself up, I stood up at the back of the boat, and everybody ordered me downstairs. I took a few moments at that point because I realised that when I started to try and move, that I was pretty solid from the waist down, and my legs weren't working that well, probably just from sitting in the water, and I had a lot of water in my legs. So I just stood there for a couple of minutes, undid the ties, let the water wash out, and then just tried to gather myself for a minute before going down, because I suppose the worst thing that could possibly happen on this thing is that I'd be just out of the water and would go over the side again. So it took a few moments and then went straight downstairs. But again, hats off now, Kylie and Lorcan were downstairs, and as soon as I got in downstairs, I could hear Lorcan was on the radio even as I was going downstairs, and had the whole protocol for that just down pat. So training works, and it's all in your head, and you did a great job, absolutely fantastic job. Yeah, hopped in downstairs. Again, everyone yelling, you gotta get out of the gear, gotta get out of the gear. Kylie yelling at me to get my kit off. So I
Didn't happen like that, Siobhan, I'm pretty sure.
So there was a sense of urgency, but everybody knew what had to happen. What had to happen at that point. I do remember saying, hang on a minute, I'm not taking the gear off yet, because I was the warmest I'd been in about 12 hours. I actually felt quite warm at that point. That lasted for a couple of seconds, and then, okay, yeah, I got the gear off. So stripped off. We had the thermal protective aid, TPAs in it. So this is like a bag that you hop into. So picture like a sarcophagus kind of thing. You've got very narrow, like a sleeping bag, very narrow feet, and it's solid, comes up to here, and the zip starts about here, and you literally hop into it, and it's got wide shoulders and then comes straight in and has a hood. And there's no arms in it, there's no nothing, and it's like a paper-like kind of feel to it, and you just go, it looks ridiculous. It looks like it wouldn't do anything for you. And you zip into this, and within about 30 seconds to a minute, you literally start to feel the heat build up. So the guys had that on board because it is a commercially rated vessel, so they've had a lot of this extra kit that people wouldn't usually carry, but I'd highly recommend it. So I hopped into that, hopped out of all the gear, hopped into that, hopped into a sleeping bag, hopped into a bunk, and I think within a few moments, I think I picked up my phone, said the text going, I'm all right, I'm in my bunk, and just left it at that, and watched, and we were heading offshore, and I was aware that we were heading offshore, so saw the text had gone through, but then signal gone, there's no more contact, and I remember looking at my phone, wondering if it was going to come back, and just conked, and I have no idea how long I was asleep for, but I remember distinctly waking up a number of times when Phil and others were coming down, checking up on me periodically to go, like waking up and saying the right questions. Did you take on water? Did you lose consciousness? All these first aid questions. So the training and the experience across the entire crew really counted a lot towards this as a successful exercise. So Yeah, from my point of view, I probably spent about 24 hours or so downstairs. I think at that point I just started coming up, and once I started getting a bit more lucid, I was just popping my head up and looking for maybe having dinner. Because as I said, every last stitch of clothing I had was now soaked. So
And just sticking your head up, the first thing you said was clip on. You were 90% downstairs.
yeah, as you can imagine, the banter got a lot better for the second half of the race because the abuse I took was just insane. But yeah, with a bit of borrowed clothing then, I've managed to kind of get a bit more warmed up again. I was able to just help from downstairs as best I could to get a bit of gruel on board, do a bit of nav and help out that way. And I'd say within, 26, 28 hours, I was back up in the crew rotation.
Yeah, so there was obviously massive relief on board once we got John on board, and we got John downstairs. And as a skipper, I've unfortunately experienced this. This was my second time experiencing that. There's a question here over the boat continuing in the race. We all set out on the race to win. That was, we'll make no mistake, bones about it. That was the game. But it was my second time going, we're potentially pulling the plug on a race after months of preparation, and not to mention personal preparation, monetary value, etc., etc., etc. So at the time we had John back on board. We had a mainsail that I had seen being smashed against a rig, and I was going, ooh, will that go up? I also knew I had a jib that smashed through a foil as well, or was banging around a foil, so I was going, ooh. So there was a quick kind of question mark on my mind is A, roughly where am I, and B, what's the nearest safe haven, and C, or can I go racing again? So very quickly the decision was made. Options A and B were eradicated, and C was, let's get sails up. We need to get sails up regardless if we were continuing or not, because we were a good bit off the coast at this stage. So, and we were just off. There was Safe Haven was a good distance away, and having spent a bit of time working down that area of the country, not a huge amount of places you can bring a racing yacht into. So anyway, we got the mainsail up, which appeared to be in fine fettle. So we got that up, and that was good to go. And we tacked over, and we got the jib going. We got the boat back sailing again, and we tacked over to head north in around about the time that John was sending a text message as I proceeded to bring the boat offshore. So we got the boat settled up, back to the same sail plan, 2 reefs to the main, J4, and everybody, understandably, there'd been a big adrenaline rush, and then everybody was now struggling a little bit. We had a couple of injured people. People were just a bit tired. A lot of us had been on deck for a considerable period of time at this age, which is a mistake in that we had thought about, J109's quite a narrow boat, about just stacking the rail for 20 hours. That's a mistake. Don't do that. No problem holding our hands up with that one. So people were tired, so we pretty much sent everybody down below, and the only 2 people that were left on deck were myself and Michael, because we needed to rest crew, and myself and himself hadn't actually done a huge amount the day before. So we stayed up on deck, and the guys went down and rested, which was fantastic. I'm sure I'm skipping some bits here, but I do remember one bit from Michael as we were going up, when I was getting a little bit worried about my boat. And we've been hammering through waves, and J109s are built the way they are, and she was taking a hammering, and I was having to run the bilge pumps, not always, but there's a bit of water sloshing down below, and a previous boat I had, Lynx, had a bit of an issue with water ingress as well, so above water ingress, not below water, just to clarify. But anyway, so I was getting a little bit nervous because the batteries get fried and so on and so forth, so it's kind of and we'd had a man overboard. I was soaked through, and I was literally sleeping, so Michael and I would swap over, and when the other person wasn't driving, they would lay down, so the wheel is here, and you kind of, we were on starboard tack, so you were kind of sitting here with the wheel here, and there's a tiny little space here. Basically you got the life raft there and a tiny little space. You would brace your legs on the leeward side and sleep behind the person driving, so if something went wrong, the person driving could kick you to get you up to the, so we continued on like that for, I don't know, a couple of hours, and Michael turned around to me at one stage and he goes, well, guys, are you enjoying yourself? And I said to him, being totally honest, Michael, I'm not. We've had a man overboard, a little bit worried about my boat, and I'm cold, wet and miserable and absolutely starving, and I quite would like a hot shower and to go home. And he goes, yes, Kenneth, we're being yachtsmen, aren't we? So we did that kind of that night. We tacked into the coast. The crew, after a couple of hours, I'm sure it was only 2 or 3 hours in reality, we had people back up on deck to relieve the two of us, which was great. And we brought the boat, not tactically, absolutely not tactically, we brought the boat further into the west coast to get a bit of shelter because it was northwesterly, the breeze. And we did get a little bit of shelter. Did it help us tactically? Absolutely not. So we did bring the boat in to get a little bit of shelter. But, before we knew where we were at, as quick as it happened, pretty much, John was popping his head up, taking dinner orders and breakfast orders, and cleaned up downstairs, finished off
found the source of the smell.
Yeah.
Never forget it.
So we had meals, and probably less than 24 hours later, we were bobbing around off Tory Island and no breeze. Actually, we put the hook down at one stage. Yeah. It
was disgusting.
Disgusting as in no wind, just to clarify.
So after being pounded up the west coast, absolutely pounded, we and a lot of the fleet struggled to get around Tory Island. So it's a complete turnaround. A chance to dry out the gear. That's about all you could really put it down to. It was still a little bit chilly for a bit of it, but it took till about that stage of the race really to have the spirits to kind of begin to come back up again, getting a bit of warmth back in our bones. I think everyone was beginning to eat again at that stage. I think everyone. So there've been a lot of not eating much for quite a while. So it's funny, you talk about the effects it has on you when there's a big incident on board of that. So everyone's heads were down anyway because it was miserable. The incident didn't help, and the continued bad weather up the west coast didn't help. But everyone still kept the chin up. We got around the north and got over to the Irish Sea again. And at that stage now, pretty much everyone was dried up and just getting on with the job. We were fully back into the crew rotation across swatches, and everyone was just really, really getting stuck in and pushing hard. So we still were pretty close. We knew we lost quite a bit on a couple of those occasions, but it was necessary. We just didn't have the option. So we gave a full welly down the east coast of Ireland. Had an absolutely beautiful, as you can see, there are no shots after that. This is all the fun was leading up to the Fastnet, and pretty much everybody left the cameras downstairs after that. Probably one or two, but we had a lovely race down along the east coast. Myself and Kylie were up on the helm, stopping over, and we had a great run pretty much the entire way from probably Rockabill or so, with our Code Zero. I think we had Code 4 jib up inside it, and then we'd on the main, and we'd absolutely blazing reach down there right the way to the finish. As with everybody else, we finished up the race getting within spitting distance of Wicklow, and you could nearly smell the pints, and it was a complete shutdown. Boats at anchor. At that stage, I think I'd been helming from Rockabill, but we were in such a groove I just did not want to let go, and the guys were all going swap out, but we were in a groove. I didn't want to let go, so we just kept on going, and we got to a point, I'd say probably within a couple of 100 meters of the harbour here, where it finally died down. You could see 0.3 knots, 0.2. It was like no, and lost all the breeze. Saw at least 3 or 4 of the boats put anchors down, so we threw the anchor down, and I was disgusted. We threw the anchor down for a few minutes, and I just remember feeling a tiny puff of breeze, and we just yelled anchors up immediately, and caught a little zephyr and scooted the entire way to the finish, and just picked up a nice little breeze the whole way in. So it was a nice end to a pretty rough race. I don't think I've talked to anybody who had a nice Round Ireland this year. I don't think I've heard anybody describe it as that. I think we'd all still come back, so don't feel too bad. but that's just what we do. But This particular one was a hell of an experience. We just thought there were so many things that we learned from it, things that we did right, things that we might have done wrong, we weren't sure, but it was successful. We did have some nice, I think that's Dermot there hanging on the side. We did have some nice times around, but a lot of the lessons that we had from these, we just wanted to have a forum where we could get up and just talk it through with people. From talking about it, everyone's read the news, we've had so many people have incidents, accidents, swept overboard, some recovered, a couple of deaths, mazel tov. And we just thought it was important to actually get up and talk about it. One of the things that I thought, by the time we got around to Wicklow, you can probably imagine that one of the only topics of conversation across every bloody watch was, yeah, and that time, and this time, and what about that, and whatever. So I felt it was good from a point of view of Irish people are really bad at talking about things. The fact that we all had to sit on a boat together for another day or two, and it was the big topic of conversation. I felt everyone talked it through, the good and the bad, and how it made you feel. And I think it's probably good psychologically to get it out. So once we came back, we kind of talked about it several times and thought it was a good thing probably just to come up and talk to everyone else and see if anybody had any opinions, suggestions. Hopefully you might pick up something you might learn, might use sometime. Hopefully you'll never have to use any of these skills anytime, but it's good to have it in the bag.
No, I've nothing else for me, but...